Badge reader flashed red. Not the friendly green it had flashed every weekday morning for 19 years, but a hard, flat red, like a stop sign somebody had bolted to the wall overnight. I stood there in the loading dock entrance of the Cedar Falls Brewing Company with my travel mug in one hand and my insulated lunch bag in the other. Swiping again, slower this time, as if the problem were my technique and not something a whole lot uglier. Tuesday, 6:14 in the morning. The Wisconsin cold came in off the river and went straight through my coat. I'm Gerard Halloran, 53 years old, and I had walked through that dock door before sunrise so many times I could have done it blind. Brew kettles humming, the smell of wet grain and warm yeast. The night crew finishing their shift, the day crew rolling in. That smell had been the background of my entire adult life. The reader flashed red a third time. Behind the glass, Donnie for maintenance saw me. He's a good kid, 26. Fixed the bottling line 100 times with me at 2 in the morning. He came to the door, and instead of opening it, he just looked at me through the glass with this expression I'd never seen on him before. Embarrassed. Like he'd walked in on something he wasn't supposed to see. He mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," and pointed up, toward the third floor, toward the offices. That's when I knew. The man who'd made the call was waiting in the second floor conference room, and his name was Brett Connolly, 32 years old. Married into the family 8 months back when he wed the owner's youngest, and somewhere in the last 4 months he'd talked his father-in-law into making him VP of Operations, a title that had never existed before he arrived. He had the kind of haircut that costs more than a case of our flagship lager, and a way of saying "let's circle back" that made grown men want to put their fists through drywall. A girl from HR I didn't recognize buzzed me in and walked me up the back stairs so I wouldn't pass the floor. Like I was contagious. Like 19 years of my life had become something the rest of the building needed to be protected from. Brett was sitting at the head of the table with a manila folder squared up in front of him and a cup of coffee from the good machine, the one in the executive kitchen that none of us on the floor were technically supposed to use. He gestured at the chair across from him. I didn't sit. "Gerard, thanks for coming in." Like I'd had a choice, like my badge worked. He slid the folder across the table. One sheet inside. Termination of employment, effective immediately. Position eliminated as part of a strategic operational restructuring. Signed at the bottom, Brett Connolly, VP of Operations. My title was Master Brewer, but that word doesn't really cover it, and it never did. I was the guy who'd reformulated the entire core lineup back when we were a 30-barrel operation losing money out of a converted machine shop on the east side. I was the guy who'd built the recipes that turned Cedar Falls Brewing from a hobby into a regional powerhouse with cans and gas stations across 4 states. And more than that, I was the guy who held the actual living cultures. Our house yeast strain, the thing that made our beer taste like our beer and nobody else's. I'd cultivated that strain over 11 years, propagated it, banked it, tweaked it generation after generation until it did exactly what I wanted it to do. What Brett didn't know, sitting there in his quarters at Pullover with that look of practice HR sympathy on his face, was that he just lit the fuse on something that was going to take down a $14 million deal. And he'd done it precisely 4 days before a payment was scheduled to clear that he had no idea even existed. 4 days. That was the number that mattered. Let me back up. 12 years ago, the man who founded this company, Walter, an old farmer's son who'd started brewing in his garage with a turkey fryer and a stubbornness that bordered on a medical condition, sat me down at a fish fry at the VFW Hall on a Friday night in February. Walter was getting older even then, already worried about what happens to a thing you build with your hands when you're not around to protect it anymore. He'd watched 2 other Wisconsin breweries he admired get bought up and gutted, their recipes value-engineered into garbage by accountants who'd never tasted their own product. He wasn't going to let that happen to us. Over a plate, a fried perch, and a glass of our own amber, Walter said something I've never forgotten. He said, "Jerry, the money men are coming. Not today, maybe not next year, but they're coming. And when they decide the people who built this place cost too much, I want there to be a tripwire, something that makes them think twice." So he had a lawyer draw up a clause, buried it in my employment agreement where nobody skimming the document would ever catch it. It said that if I were terminated without cause before any pending production milestone bonus was paid out, then full ownership of the proprietary yeast cultures and the recipe library I developed would transfer to me. Personally, not the company. Me. Notarized, filed, The master culture samples sitting in a cryogenic bank at a lab. I'd set up an account with myself, accessible only with my biometric login. The thinking was simple and beautiful. If the company ever tried to fire me to dodge paying what they owed, they'd lose the one thing worth 100 times more than what they saved. It was Walter's insurance policy against exactly the kind of arrogance Brett Connolly had just walked into. I signed the termination papers right there. Didn't say a word. Brett actually looked relieved, like he'd braced himself for a scene and was glad it never came. He had no idea the scene hadn't even started. On my way out, I stopped. Not in my old office, they'd already changed that lock too, fast workers, but at the lab on the second floor where we banked the working cultures. The day team was just coming on. They knew. You could see it in how they wouldn't quite meet my eye, and then made a point of meeting it anyway. The way good people do when they want you to know they're on your side, even when they can't say it. I didn't touch anything. I didn't need to. Everything that mattered required my login, and there wasn't a soul in that building who could get past it. I walked out the front for once, through the tap room that wasn't open yet, past the wall of medals we'd won at the Great American Beer Festival. Gold for the amber, 2 silvers and a bronze for the seasonals. My name wasn't on the plaques. Walter's was, the company's was, but I knew which liquid and which glass had earned every one of them. The January air hit me on the sidewalk, and I just stood there a second, breathing it. I drove home along the river the way I had for 19 years. Past the grain elevators, past the old paver mill they'd turned into lofts, past the bridge where my dad used to take me fishing. This town was in my blood, the way the yeast was in my beer. My wife was at the kitchen counter when I came in, still in her scrubs, about to leave for the early shift. She's a hospice nurse, 22 years of sitting with people on the worst day of their lives, and she read my face before I got my coat off. "Brett," she said, not a question. "Brett." She set down her travel mug. "That smug little—" She caught herself, glanced toward the stairs out of habit even though our son had moved out 2 years back. "That kid is going to break something he can't afford to fix." She'd met him exactly once, at the company holiday party, and she'd come home that night and told me, word for word, that he was the kind of man who confuses confidence with competence and expects everybody else to cover the difference. She'd been right about a lot of things over 26 years of marriage. She was about to be right about this too. "The bonus," I said, "the production milestone. It clears Friday. 140,000. She went still. "That's the cabin money. We've been talking about it for 3 years. A little place up north on the lake, somewhere I could fish and she could finally read a book all the way through without a pager going off. 140,000 was going to be the down payment and then some." I poured myself coffee from the pot she'd made and sat down at the table where we'd raised a kid and paid off a house and survived 2 layoff scares and a cancer scare, and her mother moving in for a year. The radio was on, the public station out of the university playing the farm report, hog futures and the price of corn, the same as every morning. "There's something you don't know," I said. And I told her about the clause. All of it. Walter, the fish fry, the lawyer, the cryobank, the biometric lock. I watched her face go from anger to confusion to something sharp and calculating that I've only seen on her a handful of times, usually right before she fixes a problem nobody else could fix. "So if they don't pay the bonus by Friday," she said slowly, "the recipes and the yeast become yours. Automatically. Automatically. And without that yeast, they can't make their own beer. Not the way it's supposed to taste. They've got fermenters full of wort right now that need our strain pitched into them. You can't substitute it any more than you can swap out the flour in your grandmother's bread and call it the same loaf." She sat down across from me. "Jerry, there's the deal. The thing you weren't supposed to know about." I knew about the deal. Everybody on the floor had heard the rumors for months. Stillwater Holdings, a beverage conglomerate out of Texas, had been circling Cedar Falls with an acquisition offer. The number floating around was $14 million, and the whole valuation, every dollar of it, was built on one thing: the brand, the recipes, and the proprietary cultures that made the product impossible to copy. Without the yeast, Stillwater would be paying $14 million for some stainless steel tanks, a lease on a building, and Brett Connolly's collection of quarter zips. "You need to be smart about this," my wife said. "Not angry. Smart." I looked at the clock on the stove. 97 hours and change until Friday at 5. I started counting. The phone started ringing around 10. Numbers I didn't know. A reporter from the Business Weekly, then a text from a kid named Theo. Our lead cellar man, 28, sharp as a tack, came up from washing kegs and worked his way into the most important room in the building because he never stopped asking questions. I've been training him for 4 years. His family ran a supper club out near the county line, and he had that quality you can't teach, where he'd taste a green beer and tell you 3 days early that the fermentation was going to drift. His text said, "Brett's got 2 guys here from some lab in Denver trying to get into the culture bank. They can't log in, he's freaking out." I called him back. "How bad is it?" "He's talking about ordering a generic strain from a supplier to keep the tanks moving. The Denver guys are telling him it won't match. He doesn't want to hear it." I almost laughed. A generic strain. 11 years I'd spent on that culture, selecting and reselecting, training it across hundreds of generations to ferment clean and dry and bring out exactly the note of bread crust and orchard fruit that made people drive across the state to buy our beer. You don't replace that with something out of a catalog. You'd be able to taste the difference in one sip, and so would every distributor and every regular who'd been drinking Cedar Falls for 15 years. What'd you tell him? The truth. That the strain is the company. That you don't bank 11 years of work in a weekend. Good man. Theo, listen to me. Whatever happens this week, you got a career in this. Don't let anybody talk you out of it. A pause. Should I be worried about my job? You let me worry about that. Just keep doing the work and keep your mouth shut about anything you don't have to talk about. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and looked at the countdown I'd set. 93 hours. Then I wrote an email to the one board member I trusted, a woman named Adele who'd been with Walter since the garage days, who'd run the books back when the books were a shoebox full of receipts, and who understood better than anyone left in that building what the yeast actually was. I kept it short. I told her she was probably hearing about access problems with the production systems. I told her my departure had triggered certain contractual matters regarding ownership of intellectual property. I told her if the board wanted to talk before Friday, I was available. But not through Brett. Not ever through Brett. I hit send and watched the screen. Wednesday morning, I woke up to gray light and the sound of a snowplow scraping down our street. My wife had already left for work. 7 missed calls on my phone. Adele had written back at 1 in the morning, "Emergency board call tonight." Walter's son knows. Brett does not yet. Sit tight. I made coffee and stood at the window watching the neighbor across the street, an old guy named Mr. Doughty. Petrovsky solved his walk the way he did every single morning of his life, snow or no snow. There's a kind of comfort in watching people do ordinary things when your own world has come off its hinges. The phone rang at 8 sharp. A name I didn't expect. The deputy director of the state's Craft Beverage Trade Association, a guy I'd known for years through the festival circuit. "Gerard, I'm going to be straight with you. I've got Stillwater's people calling me asking whether Cedar Falls can actually deliver on its production contracts for the next 2 quarters. There's something like $4 million in pre-sold distribution riding on the spring seasonal release. If those tanks can't ferment, a lot of shelves go empty, and a lot of contracts get broken." "I don't work there anymore," I said. "As of Tuesday." A long silence on the line. Then, careful. "That's a problem for an awful lot of people, Jerry. There's the warehouse crew, the bottling line, the distributors, the bar owners who've already got the spring release in their tap lists. You're talking about a couple hundred jobs at the brewery and a whole supply chain past that." I knew. That was the part that kept me up. Walter's clause was elegant, but elegance doesn't put food on anybody's table. There were people on that bottling line I'd hired myself. Single moms. Guys a year from retirement. A kid working his way through the technical college. "I'd suggest you tell Stillwater to talk to the board," I said. "Specifically a woman named Adele. She's the only one over there who understands what's actually broken." After we hung up, I sat at the table a long while. My wife came down in her scrubs, the ones with the little ducks on them that the patients always liked, and she sat across from me. "You're thinking about the people on the floor," she said. 200 of them, maybe more with the distributors. You could fix it with one phone call. I could log in, hand over the cultures, restore everything, be the hero by lunchtime, and then what? Then Brett learns nothing. The next master brewer they decide is too expensive gets the exact same treatment. And Walter's clause, the thing he spent 12 years making sure would protect the work and the people who do it, it never means a thing. She reached over and put her hand on mine. Then we wait. She was right, but being right didn't make the next 3 days any shorter. By Wednesday afternoon, the trade press had the story. Personnel disruption at Cedar Falls Brewing threatens spring production. By evening, it was on the local news. B-roll of our tap room and a reporter standing in the cold out front, Stillwater stock. They were publicly traded, which I hadn't fully appreciated, ticked down on the rumor that their headline acquisition was wobbling. Then the CEO called me himself. Walter's son. His name was Russell, and he'd taken over 6 years back when Walter finally retired to Arizona. And to give the man his due, he'd run the place decently right up until the day he handed his son-in-law a title and a key to the executive coffee machine. Gerard. His voice sounded like he'd aged 10 years since Tuesday. I owe you an apology. You do. Brett moved without board approval. I didn't even know about the termination until Adele called me last night at midnight. I've been on the phone ever since trying to understand what he's done. And it's a disaster. Stillwater's lawyers are asking questions we can't answer. The state's making noise. Our distributors are panicking. He paused, and his voice dropped. Adele told me about the clause, Gerard. Walter's clause. I had no idea it existed. He didn't want you to know. He wanted it to work when it had to, not get bargained away the first time it was inconvenient. A silence stretched out. What do you want? I looked at the countdown. 55 hours. I want to have a conversation, I said, but not before Friday at 5. Gerard, if we wait that long, then you'd better hope your Denver lab guys are as good as Brett thinks they are. Thursday afternoon, Adele called. The board met. Brett's out. Russell abstained, but it was unanimous otherwise. He's gone, Gerard. That's a start. There's more. We'd like to talk about bringing you back. Full restoration of access, a consulting rate, the bonus paid in full. Whatever it takes. By tomorrow at 5, Adele, I'll own the cultures and the recipe library outright. You know that. I do. Which is exactly why I'm asking you to think about what Walter would want. He didn't build this place to win a lawsuit. He built it to make good beer and get people honest work. If those cultures walk out the door with you, the spring release dies, the deal dies, and 200 people start updating their resumes the week before the holidays. She knew right where to push. She always had. I'll think about it, I said. But I want to be in the room Friday, and I want Theo there. The cellar man. The young one. Why? Because he's the future of this company, and he ought to be at the table when the people in charge decide what that future looks like. Thursday night, my wife and I sat at the kitchen table over a frozen pizza and 2 of our own ambers, the last 2 cans in the fridge. Probably the last 2 I'd ever drink for free. Our son had called earlier. He'd seen the news and wanted to know if his old man was okay. I told him I was better than okay. I wasn't sure yet if that was true, but I wanted it to be. My phone buzzed. An email from Stillwater's chief executive himself, a man down in Texas I'd never met. It said his company was prepared to deal with me directly, independent of Cedar Falls. A licensing arrangement for the cultures and the recipe library. The number at the bottom of the email was $3 million over 5 years, plus royalties. I turned the phone around and showed my wife. She read it twice. That's the cabin, she said quietly. That's the cabin in a boat and never worrying again. I know. What does your gut say? My gut says Walter didn't write that clause so I could sell the work to Texas and walk away. He wrote it to protect it. And your head? My head says I'd be a fool not to at least find out what they're really offering before I decide a thing worth $3 million on the wishes of a man playing golf in Scottsdale. She smiled. The tired good smile she gets when she's proud of me and won't say so directly. That's the smartest thing you've said all week. Friday morning, I walked into the Cedar Falls brewing offices wearing a visitor's badge clipped to a collar I'd ironed myself. 19 years building the thing, and I needed a sticker to get past the lobby. The girl from HR who'd walked me up the back stairs on Tuesday looked like she might be sick when she saw me. I gave her a nod to let her know I didn't hold it against her. She'd been doing what they told her. We all had, once. The conference room was packed. Adele at the head of the table. Russell looking like he hadn't slept since Monday. 2 other board members. A lawyer from Stillwater who'd flown up from Houston that morning, and in the corner, in a sport coat I'd never once seen him wear, sitting up straight and trying not to look terrified, was Theo. Adele opened it. Let me state the situation plainly, she said. As of 5 o'clock today, if Gerard's milestone bonus is not paid, full ownership of our proprietary yeast cultures and recipe library transfers to him under a clause our founder wrote 12 years ago. Without those cultures, our spring production fails, our Stillwater acquisition collapses, and this company's future is, frankly, in serious doubt. Russell spoke next, and to his credit, he looked me in the eye when he did it. Gerard, before anything else, I want to apologize for Brett. What he did was arrogant and short-sighted and a slap in the face to everything you've given this company. I brought him in because he married my daughter and I thought I could teach him. I was wrong. He wasn't ready, and I shouldn't have handed him the keys. I nodded. I wasn't going to kick the man while he was down. I'd done plenty of dumb things at 32 myself. The difference was that my dumb things never put 200 paychecks at risk. I looked at the clock on the wall. A few minutes after 9. Just under 8 hours left. Here's what I want, I said. I'd worked it all out on the drive in, testing each piece the way I'd test a recipe, looking for where it'd go wrong. First, Theo gets promoted to head of brewing operations, full authority over the cultures and the recipes. He reports to the board, not to whatever VP you hire to replace Brett. I've spent 4 years teaching him. He knows the yeast better than anyone alive except me, and in 2 years, he'll know it better than I do. Adele looked at Theo. Theo looked at me. I gave him a small nod, the same one I'd given him 100 times across a fermentation tank. Done, Adele said. Second, this company writes a real succession plan. No single recipe, no single culture, no single person ever becomes the one thing that can sink the whole operation again. You document everything. You cross-train. You build redundancy into your people the way I built it into the beer. Russell nodded slowly. Fair. Overdue. Third, my bonus pays today, all of it on schedule. I earned that. Every dollar. Of course, Adele said. Fourth, I'll consult through the spring release in the Stillwater transition. 6 months, part-time, and I'll bill you for it like the professional I am. After that, I'm done. For real. No 2 a.m. calls, no just one more batch. Russell asked the question everyone was waiting on. And the cultures? I let it hang a second. Then I told them, the cultures stay with the company. I'll sign a licensing agreement that keeps full rights here, for every product you make now and every one you make later. But I'm adding a condition. Call it Walter's Clause, Part 2. If this company ever terminates a senior technical employee without cause within 12 months of a major production deadline or a sale, that employee automatically receives co-ownership of anything they helped build. You want to cut people loose to save a buck right before payday? Fine, but you'll think hard about it first. The room was quiet. The Houston lawyer was writing so fast I thought his pen would catch fire. Russell stared at the table a long moment. That's a hell of a condition, Gerard. It's the condition Walter would have written if he'd thought of it. I'm just finishing what he started. And here's the part I want to be honest about. Because I know how it looks. I didn't walk away with nothing out of some saintly principle. The licensing agreement I signed pays me a royalty on every barrel that ships for as long as that yeast lives, which, if Theo does his job, is going to be a very long time. The cabin's getting bought. The boat too, probably. Walter didn't write that clause so I could go broke being noble. He wrote it so the work would be protected and the man who did it would be taken care of, both at once. Turns out, you can have your principles and your retirement, if you read the fine print, and you've got a wife smart enough to make you sleep on it. All in favor? Adele said. 4 hands. Then Russell's, last and slow. Unanimous. My phone buzzed around 10. Not the bonus. That would come later. A text from a number I hadn't seen in 2 years. Walter, calling from whatever golf course in Arizona he'd retired to. Adele told me everything. Proud of you, Jerry. Knew that tripwire would earn its keep someday. Don't let them forget what matters. I wrote back. Never have. Never will. At 5 o'clock my phone buzzed again. A bank notification. $140,000 deposited. The clause stayed dormant, the way Walter always hoped it would. There is a threat, never needing to be a weapon. The culture stayed where they belonged, under terms that would protect the next master brewer and the one after that. Theo caught me in the lobby as I was peeling off the visitor's badge. Mr. Halloran, I don't even know what to say. Then don't say anything. Just do the work. Take care of the people who do it with you. and read every contract they ever hand you, all the way to the last page where they hide the parts that matter." He laughed, then went serious. "Thank you, my family. This is going to mean everything to them." I shook his hand. That handshake was worth more than the bonus and the royalties put together. That night, my wife and I sat at the kitchen table with takeout from the supper club out by the county line. Theo's family's place, as it happened, and 2 beers that weren't ours for once just to see how the other half lived. The house was warm. The plow had been by. Our son had called to say he'd seen the segment on the news, and his old man looked good on camera. "So," my wife said, picking at the fish. "How's it feel?" I thought about it. "Lighter." Like I set down something heavy I'd been carrying so long I forgot it was on my back. "Good lighter?" "The best kind." She reached across and squeezed my hand. The radio played the late farm report, corn and soybeans and the long-range forecast, and out the window the snow had finally quit. The clouds were breaking up over the river, and you could see a few stars, the stubborn ones that won't let the town lights drown them out. Some things are worth more than a $14 million deal in a corner office and 19 years of proving yourself to people who never once looked up from their coffee to notice. Some things are worth fighting for, but the trick, the part nobody tells you, is knowing the exact moment to stop fighting and go home and finally start living. The countdown had run out, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't counting a single thing. The thing I keep coming back to, weeks later, sitting on the dock at the cabin we finally bought, is how close I came to making it easy for them. One phone call Tuesday morning and Brett Connolly would have kept his title. The tanks would have kept fermenting, and nobody outside that building would have ever known how close the whole thing came to falling apart. I'd have been the quiet hero who fixed it and got nothing. And the next master brewer they decided was too expensive would have gotten the exact same folder slid across the exact same table. What stopped me wasn't anger, even though I had plenty of it. What stopped me was that my wife sat me down and made me think instead of react. That's the part I want anybody listening to understand. The reason this worked out wasn't luck. It was that Walter saw the danger coming 12 years early and had the steadiness to build a tripwire and then wait, patiently, never once bragging about it, for a day he hoped would never come. It was that I'd spent 11 years on a yeast strain when it would have been easier to buy something out of a catalog. Because doing the work all the way to the bottom is the only thing that ever actually protects you. And it was that when the moment came, I had the spine to sit on my hands for 4 days while 200 people's jobs hung in the air, because I knew the short-term fix would teach everyone the wrong lesson. Those 3 things have to travel together, or none of them is worth much. A man who's honest but soft gets walked on. A man who's clever but has no character becomes Brett, slick and confident, and one bad decision away from torching everything other people build. And a man with principle and brains but no patience folds the minute the pressure climbs, because doing the right thing almost always costs you something before it pays you back. I didn't keep the cultures out of spite, and I didn't hand them back out of weakness. I built a clause that protects the next person, took the bonus I'd earned, and structured a deal that takes care of my family for as long as that yeast lives. You can stand on your values and still read the fine print. Those aren't opposites. The people who told me I was a fool for not grabbing the Texas money were measuring the wrong thing. The win wasn't the biggest number on the table. The win was Theo running that brewery now, the contract that makes them think twice before they do this to anyone again, and a handshake from a kid whose family is going to be okay. Do the work nobody sees. Tell the truth even when silence pays better. And, when you're right, find the patience to wait for the moment to prove it. That's the whole thing. That's all I've got.